What happens when a tiny ship takes on a fleet of giants? In October 1944, the USS Johnston faced 6 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers in a fight that defied logic and redefined bravery. Led by a fearless captain who chose honor over safety, this is the tale of a crew who made history not by surviving, but by standing their ground. This is the story of a ship that became a legend. Let's uncover the unforgettable battle off Samar. Before we continue, friends, I kindly ask you to subscribe to my channel. It takes just a second for you, but it gives me incredible motivation to keep creating these videos. I'd also greatly appreciate your comments. Thank you for your support, and now, let's dive back into the story. October 1944. The waters around the Philippine Islands, calm yet ominous, bore silent witness to what would soon become the largest naval battle in recorded history, the Battle of Leyte Gulf. This sprawling engagement, critical to the liberation of the Philippines, pitted the Japanese Imperial Navy against the formidable forces of the Allied fleet. Among the combatants stood a modest yet fiercely determined vessel, the USS Johnston DD 557, a Fletcher-class destroyer under the command of Lieutenant Commander Ernest E. The Johnston, sleek and agile, was not designed to take on heavily armed battleships or cruisers. Its role was to support the escort carriers of Task Unit April 3rd, 77, known as Taffy 3, providing essential anti-aircraft and anti-submarine protection. These escort carriers, equipped with small planes designed for reconnaissance and ground support, were the backbone of Allied amphibious operations. Protecting them was paramount, as they played a crucial role in the ongoing liberation of the Philippines. Evans, the Johnston's fearless skipper, had already earned a reputation for his daring leadership and unshakable resolve. Born of Native American heritage, Evans carried an unyielding sense of duty. From the very moment he took command of the Johnston in 1943, he promised his crew that he would never ask them to do anything he wasn't prepared to do himself. True to his word, Evans' courage became a beacon for his men, inspiring loyalty and an indomitable fighting spirit. As the Johnston and her sister ships patrolled off Samar Island, a specter of danger loomed to the north. Japanese Admiral Takeo Kurita, commanding the center force, led a formidable fleet through the San Bernardino Strait. This armada comprised 6 battleships, including the fearsome Yamato, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Their mission: to annihilate the Allied forces supporting the Leyte landings. By dawn on October 25th, Kurita's fleet had slipped through the strait undetected and was bearing down on Taffy 3. At first light, the quiet waters around Taffy 3 erupted into chaos. A reconnaissance plane from one of the escort carriers spotted the massive Japanese fleet closing in. Alarms blared aboard the Johnston as her crew scrambled to battle stations. The sheer scale of the enemy force was staggering. Against Taffy 3's 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts, the odds were overwhelmingly lopsided. Yet retreat was not an option. Evans, his steely gaze fixed on the horizon, weighed the desperate situation. The survival of the carriers and the troops they supported onshore hinged on the destroyer's ability to hold the line. With no time to lose, Evans made a fateful decision. Over the ship's intercom, his voice rang out with unwavering resolve. "We're going in. Get ready for a fight." As the Johnston surged forward, her torpedo tubes primed and guns readied, a mixture of fear and determination gripped her crew. They knew their ship was not built to withstand the crushing firepower of the enemy's battleships and cruisers. Yet under Evans' leadership, they felt the weight of history on their shoulders. What followed was a testament to courage and sacrifice against impossible odds. The first light of October 25th revealed a menacing reality. As the sun began to pierce the veil of the early morning haze, a Taffy 3 reconnaissance pilot spotted dark shapes moving with ominous purpose through the San Bernardino Strait. The full scale of the threat became apparent moments later. The Japanese center force, spearheaded by 6 battleships, 10 cruisers, and a fleet of destroyers, was heading straight for Taffy 3's vulnerable position off the coast of Samar Island. A chill swept through the ranks of the Allied sailors. This was a David and Goliath scenario on a scale they had never anticipated. Aboard the USS Johnston, alarms blared as the crew snapped into action. Lookouts, scanning the horizon, began to report the silhouettes of massive enemy warships. The sight of the Yamato, the largest and most heavily armed battleship ever constructed, was enough to strike fear into even the most seasoned sailors. Its 18.1-inch guns, capable of hurling shells weighing over a ton at targets more than 25 miles away, loomed as an almost apocalyptic threat. Alongside the Yamato, other battleships and cruisers formed a phalanx of destruction. The situation demanded swift and decisive action. Johnston's commander, Ernest E, immediately recognized that his small fleet of escort carriers and their lightly armed protectors could not hope to withstand such an assault without extraordinary measures. The only chance of survival lay in disrupting the enemy's formation and forcing them to focus on smaller, more maneuverable targets. With a grim determination, Evans gave the order. Johnston would close the distance and engage. As the Johnston surged forward, its guns came to life. The ship's 5.5-inch/38 caliber guns, while minuscule compared to the armament of the Yamato and her sister ships, unleashed a relentless barrage. Johnston's torpedo tubes were armed and ready, and Evans aimed the ship straight at the heart of the enemy formation, targeting the lead heavy cruiser. This act of defiance was both strategic and symbolic. Evans was determined to show the enemy that Taffy 3 would not go down without a fight. The first torpedoes launched from Johnston streaked through the water, leaving a frothy trail in their wake. Seconds later, one of the Japanese cruisers was hit, a massive explosion tearing through its hull. Smoke billowed skyward as the crew of the Johnston cheered. It was a small victory, but it proved that even the most heavily armed adversaries were not invincible. Taffy 3's response to the unfolding crisis was a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of its crews. As Johnston led the charge, the other destroyers and destroyer escorts began laying down a dense smokescreen to obscure the position of the vulnerable escort carriers. Meanwhile, aircraft from the carriers scrambled into the sky. These planes, armed with whatever ordnance was available, launched desperate strikes against the oncoming Japanese fleet. Dive bombers and torpedo planes buzzed around the enemy's ships like hornets, seeking weak points and sowing chaos. Despite the overwhelming odds, the men of Taffy 3 found strength in their shared purpose. Johnston's relentless attack had not only drawn the attention of several enemy ships, but also inspired her sister vessels to join the fight. USS Hull and USS Heroism, following Johnston's example, charged toward the enemy, their guns blazing. Together, these small ships formed a line of defiance, their actions buying precious time for the carriers to maneuver and launch additional aircraft. The Johnston's aggressive maneuvers were not without risk. The ship weaved through torrents of enemy fire, its crew working tirelessly to avoid the massive shells that exploded around them. Each near-miss sent columns of water skyward, drenching the ship and its crew. Yet Evans remained steadfast, shouting orders from the bridge with the calm precision of a man born for command. His resolve bolstered the spirits of his men, who found themselves willing to follow their captain into the jaws of death. As the battle intensified, the Johnston became a beacon of defiance. Her silhouette, cutting through the smoke and fire, was a rallying point for the rest of Taffy 3. Japanese commanders, stunned by the audacity of the American destroyers, began to shift their focus from the carriers to the more immediate threat posed by the smaller ships. This shift in attention marked the beginning of a desperate and chaotic melee that would come to define the battle off Samar. Johnston's crew, their hearts pounding and adrenaline surging, continued to fight with every ounce of their strength. The ship's gunners, despite the limited range and power of their weapons, took aim at the towering superstructures of the enemy battleships, hoping to disrupt their fire control systems. Meanwhile, the torpedo crews prepared for another strike, their hands moving with practiced efficiency as they loaded and armed the deadly weapons. In the chaos, Johnston succeeded in creating a momentary lull in the enemy's advance. The Japanese fleet, caught off guard by the ferocity of the American defense, began to lose cohesion. This disruption allowed the carriers of Taffy 3 to reposition and launch another wave of aircraft, further complicating the enemy's efforts to press their attack. The Johnston, though battered and outgunned, had achieved the impossible. In the face of overwhelming odds, she had not only survived but had also taken the fight to the enemy. Yet the battle was far from over, and the men of Taffy 3 knew that their greatest test still lay ahead. As the Johnston barreled toward the heart of the Japanese fleet, its commander, Ernest E, stood resolute on the bridge. His decision to charge directly into the fray was as audacious as it was necessary. The odds were staggering. 6 battleships, including the monstrous Yamato, and an array of cruisers and destroyers loomed before them, each bristling with weapons capable of obliterating the smaller American ships. Yet Evans displayed no hesitation. His mission was clear: to shield the escort carriers of Taffy 3 at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing his own ship. Evans' unwavering courage inspired every member of the Johnston's crew. Many of them had never seen their captain falter, and they would not start doubting him now. Evans had forged a reputation as a leader who fought shoulder to shoulder with his men, and his determination was infectious. The crew understood the stakes. Without their intervention, the Japanese fleet would surely devastate the lightly defended carriers and disrupt the entire Allied campaign in the Philippines. The Johnston's guns roared to life as the ship entered firing range. Targeting a Japanese heavy cruiser, the gunners worked with precision and speed. Though the Johnston's 5-inch guns lacked the firepower to sink a cruiser outright, the concentrated barrage began to take its toll. Enemy gunners struggled to respond as the destroyer weaved and twisted, making itself a difficult target. Evans' decision to engage at such close range forced the Japanese ships to redirect their fire, momentarily relieving the pressure on the vulnerable carriers. Evans ordered another torpedo salvo. The crew worked quickly, their movements honed by months of drills and practice. Each torpedo was carefully aimed to maximize damage to the larger Japanese vessels. Moments later, a tremendous explosion rocked the waters as one of the torpedoes found its mark, tearing through the hull of a Japanese cruiser. Smoke and flames engulfed the ship, a testament to the Johnston's effectiveness despite its smaller size. Meanwhile, the Johnston's own hull began to bear the scars of battle. Shells from the Japanese ships screamed through the air, some striking perilously close to the destroyer. The impact sent shudders through the vessel, dislodging equipment and knocking crew members off their feet. One shell struck the aft deck, igniting a fire that threatened to spread. Damage control teams sprang into action, smothering the flames and shoring up the ship's integrity with whatever materials they could muster. The Johnston's attack was not without strategic impact. Japanese commanders, stunned by the audacity of the American destroyers, began to shift their focus. Instead of directing their overwhelming firepower at the carriers, they turned their guns on the attacking ships. This shift in attention gave Taffy 3's aircraft the opportunity to launch more sorties. Torpedo planes and dive bombers swarmed the Japanese fleet, harassing the larger ships and forcing them to divert resources to anti-aircraft defense. Even as the Johnston sustained damage, Evans refused to relent. He ordered the ship to close in further, determined to exploit every advantage. The destroyer darted between the larger ships, its smaller size and agility proving to be assets in the chaos of battle. Each successful strike was met with cheers from the crew, a small but meaningful victory in the face of overwhelming adversity. For Evans, this was a fight not just for survival but for honor. His actions embodied the highest ideals of naval warfare: bravery, sacrifice, and an unyielding commitment to duty. He knew that the odds were against him, yet he chose to act, understanding that his decisions would have consequences far beyond the fate of his ship. The Japanese fleet, for all its size and firepower, began to show signs of disarray. The relentless attacks from the Johnston and its sister ships, combined with the harassment from American aircraft, disrupted their formation. Communication lines broke down, and individual ships were forced to act independently. This loss of cohesion, though temporary, was enough to buy the Allies precious time. As the Johnston continued its assault, the crew drew strength from their captain's resolve. Evans, a picture of calm under fire, moved among his men, offering words of encouragement and issuing orders with the confidence of a seasoned commander. His leadership created an atmosphere of determination and unity, a stark contrast to the chaos of the battle raging around them. Despite their successes, the Johnston and its allies were far from safe. The Japanese fleet, though momentarily thrown off balance, still possessed overwhelming firepower. The destroyers of Taffy 3 were running low on ammunition, and their damage control efforts were becoming increasingly desperate. Yet they pressed on, driven by a shared belief in the importance of their mission. In the end, the Johnston's actions were more than just a tactical maneuver. They were a statement of defiance, a demonstration of the power of courage and determination in the face of impossible odds. As the ship pressed forward, it became a symbol of resistance, inspiring not only the men aboard but also their comrades across Taffy 3. The fight was far from over, but the spirit of the Johnston would endure, a testament to the indomitable will of those who dared to stand against the tide. The USS Johnston reeled from the impact of multiple Japanese shells. Each hit a brutal reminder of the overwhelming firepower it faced. A massive explosion shook the ship as a shell tore through the aft deck, severing vital control lines to the rudder. The destroyer, momentarily adrift, began listing to port. Black smoke billowed from the damaged engine room, and flames licked at the deck, threatening to engulf the ship. Despite the devastation, the crew fought back with a resolve that transcended their desperate situation. In the thick of the chaos, the damage control teams became the unsung heroes of the battle. Men crawled through smoke-filled compartments, some barely wide enough to navigate, to contain flooding and extinguish fires. Others worked feverishly to reroute power, to keep the remaining gun batteries operational. One team, led by Chief Engineer Richard Gallant, fought against time and heat to patch a ruptured steam line critical to maintaining what little propulsion the ship had left. The temperature in the compartment reached unbearable levels. Yet the men pressed on, driven by a shared determination to keep their ship in the fight. On the bridge, Commander Ernest Evans maintained his composure, his voice cutting through the cacophony of battle. "Steady, men. We're not out yet," he shouted, rallying his crew. Even as the Johnston's speed dropped and its maneuverability diminished, Evans ordered aggressive turns and sudden speed bursts to throw off the enemy gunners. These maneuvers, though limited by the ship's damage, forced the Japanese gunners to constantly adjust, buying precious seconds for the crew to regroup. The tactical ingenuity of the Johnston's crew was matched by their ingenuity in improvising repairs. In the ammunition magazine, sailors scrambled to secure shells that had been jarred loose by the relentless impacts. Above decks, a gun crew worked furiously to clear debris from one of the forward 5-inch guns, rendering it operational once more. Despite the constant threat of incoming fire, the gun's operator, Petty Officer Second Class James Malloy, loaded and fired with an unyielding rhythm, targeting the approaching Japanese cruisers. Each shell was a message of defiance, a declaration that the Johnston would not go quietly. Amidst the chaos, a shell burst near the ship's midsection, sending shrapnel flying through the air. Several men were thrown to the deck, injured but alive. Without hesitation, Corpsman John Davis rushed into the open, dodging debris and enemy fire, to tend to the wounded. Using makeshift bandages, he stabilized the injured before helping them below deck. Davis's bravery exemplified the spirit of the Johnston's crew, who refused to abandon one another even in the face of imminent danger. In the engine room, the situation grew increasingly dire. A fire raged near the fuel lines, threatening to explode if not contained. Engineer Tom Raines and his team donned gas masks and attacked the flames with extinguishers and whatever tools they could find. The acrid smoke choked the air, but they managed to contain the fire just as it reached the fuel storage tanks. Their efforts prevented what could have been a catastrophic detonation, allowing the Johnston to continue the fight a little longer. As the ship limped forward, its guns kept firing. The remaining functional batteries targeted the lead Japanese destroyer, scoring direct hits that crippled its propulsion. The enemy ship veered off course, unable to maintain formation. The sight of their adversary retreating sent a surge of hope through the crew, even as exhaustion and injuries began to take their toll. The emotional strain on the Johnston's crew was palpable. Fear, exhaustion, and adrenaline mixed in equal measure, yet none faltered. Each man understood the stakes. They were the last line of defense for the vulnerable escort carriers behind them. Despite the overwhelming odds, they chose to fight, driven by a sense of duty and the example set by their captain. Through the smoke and chaos, the Johnston silhouette remained defiant, a testament to the resilience of its crew. Every maneuver, every repair, every shot fired was a small victory in a battle that seemed unwinnable. The ship's battered frame groaned under the strain, but it stood firm, embodying the indomitable spirit of those who sailed her. The Johnston, now limping and battered, fought like a cornered beast. Each passing moment brought new challenges as Japanese shells continued to rain down, ripping through the ship's steel hull. The crew faced a relentless cascade of emergencies, yet their collective resolve only seemed to strengthen with each crisis. The fire in the engine room was extinguished, but the damage to the propulsion system left the ship barely capable of maneuvering. The once agile destroyer was now vulnerable, its speed significantly reduced. Despite this, Evans refused to retreat. He barked orders to reposition the Johnston in a way that maximized its remaining firepower while keeping the most heavily damaged sections of the ship out of the enemy's line of sight. These maneuvers, though limited, continued to frustrate the Japanese gunners. Above deck, the surviving gun crews pressed on with tireless determination. One of the remaining 5-inch guns had its sighting mechanism disabled, forcing the gunners to rely on manual adjustments. They worked in unison, calling out ranges and angles with the precision of a finely tuned machine. Each shot sent a resounding boom across the ocean, a stark reminder that the Johnston was far from finished. Amid the chaos, Seaman First Class Robert Bob Lopez found himself manning a forward ammunition hoist alone after his team was incapacitated by shrapnel. Shell after shell, Lopez worked feverishly, hauling heavy rounds to feed the insatiable guns. His hands bled from the sharp edges of the metal casings, yet he did not falter. "Keep them firing," he muttered under his breath, a mantra that carried him through the chaos. As the Japanese concentrated their fire on the Johnston, the crew's ingenuity shone. When the starboard engine was hit, Chief Engineer Richard Gallant orchestrated a daring patch job under fire. With pieces of salvage piping and spare parts, the engineering team managed to coax just enough power to keep the ship's propellers turning. Their success allowed the Johnston to execute a slow, deliberate turn, bringing its undamaged port-side guns to bear on an approaching enemy cruiser. Tactically, the Johnston's role was clear: distract and disrupt the Japanese fleet for as long as possible. Evans ordered a barrage aimed at the lead Japanese destroyer, its sleek silhouette closing in with alarming speed. The first salvo missed, splashing harmlessly into the water, but the second struck true. Smoke erupted from the enemy ship's bow as it slowed, trailing debris. For a moment, the Johnston's crew cheered, a fleeting victory in an otherwise grim tableau. Below deck, the medical bay became a scene of controlled chaos. Wounded sailors, many with burns or shrapnel wounds, lay on stretchers as pharmacist Mate Second Class John Davis moved from one patient to the next. With a limited supply of morphine and bandages, Davis improvised, using torn pieces of uniforms to staunch bleeding and splints fashioned from broken furniture to stabilize fractures. His calm demeanor provided reassurance to the injured, even as the walls of the infirmary shuddered with each enemy hit. On the bridge, Evans continued to inspire his crew. Standing tall despite the ship's lurching movements, He surveyed the battle with a steady gaze. His orders were sharp and decisive, his belief in his crew unwavering. "We've got them rattled," he shouted over the din of battle. "Let's keep them guessing." His leadership radiated confidence, even as the odds stacked higher against them. As the Johnston absorbed more punishment, the deck became a patchwork of scars. Fires broke out intermittently, and sections of railing were sheared away by close detonations. Despite the chaos, the ship maintained a level of discipline that spoke to the training and resolve of its crew. Each sailor understood their role, and none hesitated to act, even under the most perilous conditions. The battle reached a fever pitch as the Johnston maneuvered into an exposed position to shield one of the retreating escort carriers. Shells screamed overhead, some striking perilously close, sending plumes of water high into the air. One hit breached the ship's port side, flooding a compartment and threatening to capsize the vessel. Crew members quickly counterflooded the starboard side to restore balance, an act that required precision and nerve under relentless fire. The Japanese fleet, though still advancing, was visibly slowed by the Johnston's defiance. Confusion rippled through their formation as the destroyer's aggressive tactics disrupted their lines. The Johnston had become a thorn in their side, drawing fire and attention away from the more vulnerable Allied ships. For Evans and his crew, the knowledge that they were buying time for their comrades was enough to fuel their determination. As the day wore on, the Johnston bore the marks of its sacrifice, a listing hull, a shattered deck, and exhausted sailors pushing themselves to their limits. Yet, despite the mounting damage, the ship remained a symbol of resistance. Each act of bravery, each improvised repair, and each carefully aimed shot reinforced the legacy that the Johnston's crew would leave behind. Their fight was not over, but their resolve was unshakable. Against impossible odds, the Johnston's crew embodied the spirit of naval warfare, a blend of courage, ingenuity, and an unyielding commitment to duty. The battered ship continued to fight, a beacon of defiance in the storm of war. As the USS Johnston continued to endure the enemy onslaught, the ship's damage began to exact a severe toll on its ability to fight. Fires flared up in multiple compartments, and the destroyer's deck was a twisted landscape of ruptured steel, scattered debris, and injured sailors struggling to carry out their duties. Yet, despite the increasing odds against them, the crew displayed an indomitable spirit, meeting every challenge with resourcefulness and grit. One of the most critical moments occurred when a large-caliber shell tore into the Johnston's starboard side, obliterating an auxiliary engine room. The blast sent shockwaves throughout the ship, knocking sailors off their feet and plunging the affected compartments into darkness. Chief Engineer Richard Gallant quickly assessed the damage and coordinated a response. With power partially lost, he and his team worked in the sweltering heat of the remaining engine room, bypassing damaged circuits and redistributing power to ensure the remaining gun mounts stayed operational. Their efforts were a testament to their skill and unyielding determination. On the main deck, chaos reigned as another shell exploded near the aft gun mount. The gun crew, dazed but alive, scrambled to resume firing. Petty Officer Second Class James Malloy, his uniform scorched and his face streaked with soot, shouted above the roar of battle, rallying his men to reload the damaged weapon. They manually adjusted the gun's trajectory, firing at an advancing Japanese cruiser with deadly precision. Each shot seemed a defiant statement. The Johnston might be crippled, but it was far from defeated. Amid the destruction, the medical team operated under almost impossible conditions. The ship's infirmary, already overcrowded with wounded sailors, became a scene of desperation and heroism. Pharmacist Mate John Davis, using limited supplies, performed emergency surgeries to stabilize the gravely injured. When stretcher space ran out, sailors fashioned makeshift slings from torn canvas and deck cables. Davis moved from patient to patient, offering words of encouragement even as the ship shuddered from enemy fire. His calm demeanor was a lifeline for those around him. Above deck, Captain Evans continued to direct the battle with unwavering resolve. Standing on the bridge, He used binoculars to monitor the enemy's movements and issued commands to his crew with precision. "We're not done yet, men," he called out, his voice cutting through the cacophony. "Keep hitting them where it hurts." His leadership was the glue holding the crew together, inspiring them to press on despite the overwhelming odds. As the Johnston's speed diminished further, Evans ordered a risky maneuver. The destroyer would execute a broadside attack, turning its remaining guns toward the enemy to maximize firepower. This tactic, though exposing the ship to additional fire, allowed the Johnston to strike at the heart of the Japanese formation. The gunners, some of whom had been firing continuously for hours, redoubled their efforts. One salvo struck the bow of a Japanese destroyer, causing secondary explosions that sent flames and debris skyward. At the same time, a new threat emerged. A formation of enemy planes appeared on the horizon, likely dispatched to finish what the Japanese fleet had started. The Johnston's anti-aircraft gunners sprang into action, manning their stations with the intensity of men who knew their survival depended on it. Seaman Bob Lopez, already fatigued from hauling ammunition earlier in the battle, now found himself loading anti-aircraft rounds at a feverish pace. His actions, along with those of his fellow gunners, created a wall of flak that deterred some of the incoming planes and forced others to veer off course. Despite the crew's heroic efforts, the ship's condition grew increasingly dire. The flooding in the lower decks worsened, threatening to overwhelm the Johnston's already compromised buoyancy. Damage control teams worked tirelessly, sealing off compartments and pumping out water with whatever equipment remained functional. At one point, when an emergency pump failed, sailors formed a bucket brigade, passing water up to the deck by hand, a grueling task that underscored their refusal to give in. The emotional toll of the battle was evident, yet it only seemed to strengthen the crew's resolve. Sailors shouted encouragement to one another as they worked, their voices cutting through the smoke and chaos. Even those who were injured refused to abandon their posts, insisting on continuing to fight. It was as if the ship itself had become a living embodiment of their collective determination, a steel warrior that would not surrender. As the day wore on, the Johnston's contributions to the battle became increasingly clear. Its relentless attacks had disrupted the Japanese fleet's advance, forcing enemy ships to divert their fire and alter their course. The destroyer's actions, though costly, had bought precious time for the escort carriers and the other Allied ships to regroup and launch counterattacks. Captain Evans, sensing the end was near, gathered his senior officers for a brief moment on the bridge. "We've done our duty," he said, his voice steady but tinged with the weight of the situation. "Now let's finish this the way we started, together." His words resonated with everyone present, a final rallying cry that would carry them through the final moments of the Johnston's fight. As the ship pressed on, its silhouette battered but unbroken, the crew's actions spoke louder than words. Every shot fired, every repair made, every order followed was a testament to their courage and commitment. The Johnston might not survive the day, but its legacy was already assured, a symbol of bravery against impossible odds. The USS Johnston, though heavily damaged, continued to press forward, a testament to the courage and ingenuity of its crew. With each moment, the battle escalated to a fever pitch. Japanese shells hammered the destroyer relentlessly, tearing through the hull and igniting new fires. The air reeked of smoke and salt as flames licked the sides of the ship, but the crew worked tirelessly to maintain order and ensure that the Johnston remained a formidable threat. One of the most harrowing moments came when a direct hit struck near the bridge, shattering windows and showering the crew with shards of glass and debris. Captain Ernest Evans was thrown to the deck, but he quickly regained his footing. Despite a bleeding gash on his forehead, he refused medical attention, instead issuing orders to counter the growing threat. His calm, authoritative presence inspired his officers and sailors, who redoubled their efforts even as the ship's systems faltered. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Richard Gallant and his team faced what seemed an insurmountable task. With one engine completely offline and the other barely operational, the Johnston's ability to maneuver was critically hampered. Working in stifling heat, Gallant's team scavenged parts from destroyed sections of the ship, improvising makeshift repairs. The roar of machinery mingled with the distant thuds of enemy fire as they fought to squeeze every ounce of power from the damaged engines. Above deck, the crew faced equally dire challenges. Fires raged along the aft section of the ship, threatening to detonate ammunition stores. Damage control teams rushed to contain the infernos, using seawater pumped through hoses and, when necessary, even smothering flames with their own uniforms. Sailors like Seaman First-Class Robert Bob Lopez distinguished themselves in these moments, working tirelessly to ferry water and extinguish flames despite the constant danger of explosions. The forward gun crews, battered but undeterred, continued to fire at the advancing Japanese fleet. Their relentless barrage created enough confusion to force enemy ships to alter course, disrupting their formation. Petty Officer Second Class James Malloy, his hands blistered from hours at the gun, barked encouragement to his team as they loaded and fired with machine-like precision. "One more shot, boys. Make it count," he yelled, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. The Johnston's final torpedo run became a moment of desperate heroism. Despite the ship's reduced speed, Evans ordered the launch of the last remaining torpedoes, aiming for the lead Japanese cruiser. The maneuver brought the Johnston perilously close to the enemy line, exposing it to concentrated fire. As the torpedoes streaked toward their target, Japanese shells tore through the ship's superstructure, sending showers of sparks and debris across the deck. One shell detonated near the starboard side, killing several sailors and leaving a gaping hole that allowed seawater to flood into critical compartments. Despite the chaos, the crew maintained their focus. The torpedoes struck their mark, exploding against the hull of the enemy cruiser with a deafening roar. The Japanese ship slowed, trailing thick black smoke, a testament to the Johnston's ability to punch above its weight. Cheers erupted among the crew, though their victory was short-lived as another salvo of enemy fire rained down, crippling the destroyer further. The medical bay was overwhelmed as the number of wounded grew. Pharmacist Mate John Davis worked tirelessly to stabilize the injured, often performing procedures with makeshift tools under the flickering light of emergency lanterns. When a fire threatened to consume the infirmary, Davis and several volunteers moved patients by hand to safer areas of the ship, a perilous task that underscored the crew's commitment to one another. Amid the destruction, Captain Evans made a fateful decision. Recognizing that the Johnston was nearing its limits, he ordered the ship to turn once more toward the enemy. "If we go down," he said, his voice resolute, "we'll take as many of them with us as we can." The crew responded with a resounding cheer, their spirits unbroken despite the dire circumstances. As the Johnston executed its final assault, sailors scrambled to their stations, ready to unleash whatever firepower remained. The destroyer's guns roared defiantly, even as Japanese shells tore through its decks. The ship, listing heavily and trailing smoke, remained a thorn in the side of the enemy fleet. Its actions continued to buy time for the retreating Allied ships, a fact not lost on the crew, who fought with the knowledge that their sacrifice was not in vain. The end came swiftly. A barrage of enemy fire struck the Johnston's midsection, causing catastrophic flooding and severing power to critical systems. Despite the damage, the crew continued to fight, firing the last of their ammunition and preparing for the inevitable. Captain Evans, standing tall on the bridge, issued his final order: abandon ship. His voice was calm, a steady beacon of leadership in the storm of chaos. Sailors leaped into the sea, clutching life vests and rafts as the Johnston began to sink. Even as the ship slipped beneath the waves, its legacy was cemented. The actions of its crew had delayed the Japanese advance, giving the Allies a critical opportunity to regroup and counterattack. The Johnston's stand would be remembered as one of the most heroic moments in naval history. As dawn stretched over the vast waters of Leyte Gulf, the Japanese fleet's retreat came as a momentary enigma to the battered survivors of USS Johnston and Taffy III. The air was still thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning steel, a stark reminder of the ferocity of the engagement. Yet, within the chaos of victory lay an immediate struggle for survival. For the men who had braved fire and storm, the battle was not yet over. The sea, an endless expanse of gray and blue, became both refuge and adversary for the crew of the Johnston. Debris from the wrecked destroyer floated around them, forming a grim mosaic of shattered lifeboats, oil slicks, and twisted metal. Survivors clung to anything buoyant, their faces smeared with soot and salt water, eyes searching the horizon for signs of rescue. In the water, Captain Ernest Evans became a symbol of resilience and hope. Severely injured, he floated alongside his men, encouraging them to remain calm and conserve energy. Despite his pain, Evans refused to accept any assistance, insisting that it be directed toward the most critically injured. "I'll be fine," he assured his crew, though his pallor betrayed the severity of his wounds. For the men around him, his unwavering composure was a lifeline, a reminder of their shared duty to one another. As hours passed, the situation grew more dire. Exposure to the elements sapped the strength of the survivors, while the heavy oil coating their bodies caused nausea and hindered movement. Sharks, drawn by the scent of blood and oil, began circling the debris field, adding a chilling new dimension to their plight. Yet the men of Johnston, forged in the crucible of battle, faced these challenges with the same courage that had defined their stand against impossible odds. Among them, gunner's mate first-class Samuel Sam Peters emerged as a leader in the water. Using pieces of wreckage, Peters fashioned makeshift rafts, guiding weaker crewmates to safety. His voice, hoarse but resolute, cut through the despair. "Stay together. Keep your heads up," he commanded, his own exhaustion masked by the urgency of survival. Around him, the crew rallied, their bonds of camaraderie stronger than ever. In a poignant act of sacrifice, pharmacist mate John Davis, who had tirelessly cared for the wounded aboard Johnston, now faced his own mortality. Realizing that his injuries would slow the group's progress, Davis urged his crewmates to leave him behind. "You've got to live for the rest of us," he said, his words etched in the hearts of those who survived. Though they resisted, his determination won out, and Davis's final moments became a testament to the spirit of selflessness that defined the crew. The sea's unforgiving nature tested even the strongest among them. Lieutenant Robert Crane, the ship's communications officer, worked relentlessly to organize the survivors, using scraps of cloth and signal mirrors to attract attention from any passing vessels. His efforts bore fruit when, hours later, a distant speck on the horizon revealed itself to be a friendly ship. The USS Raymond, part of the remaining escort fleet, had turned back in search of survivors. The sight of the Raymond approaching brought tears to the eyes of the men, their resilience finally rewarded. Sailors aboard the rescue vessel worked frantically, lowering lifeboats and throwing lines to pull the exhausted survivors from the water. Each man hauled aboard was greeted with shouts of encouragement and immediate medical attention. The crew of the Raymond, despite their own fatigue and losses, treated the Johnston survivors as heroes, understanding the magnitude of their sacrifice. For many of the rescued, the ordeal was far from over. Severe burns, hypothermia, and dehydration took their toll, and the trauma of the battle lingered long after the physical wounds began to heal. Yet the shared experience of survival forged bonds that would endure for a lifetime. Stories of bravery and loss circulated among the survivors, each man's tale a piece of the larger mosaic that was the legacy of the Johnston. Captain Evans, tragically, was not among those saved. Witnesses recounted his final moments in the water, still encouraging his men even as his strength faded. His disappearance beneath the waves marked the end of an extraordinary life, but his memory became a rallying cry for those who lived to tell the tale. "Captain Evans never abandoned us," said one survivor, his voice filled with reverence. "He fought for us until the very end." The rescue operation concluded with a somber inventory of those who had perished. Of Johnston's original crew of 327, only 141 survived the battle and its aftermath. Yet their survival was not just a testament to their endurance. It was a tribute to the leadership and heroism that had defined their time aboard the ship. In the weeks and months that followed, the survivors became living embodiments of the Johnston spirit, sharing their story with a world eager to understand the true cost of victory. As the sun set over the Pacific, the waters where the Johnston had made its last stand grew quiet once more. Yet for those who had fought and survived, the memory of that fateful day remained vivid. A story of bravery, sacrifice, and unyielding resolve. The legacy of the Johnston and its crew was etched into the annals of history, a beacon of inspiration for generations to come. In the days following the rescue of USS Johnston survivors, the true impact of the ship's last stand began to take shape, not only in the stories told by its crew, but also in the broader context of the Battle of Leyte Gulf. As the men recovered from their physical wounds and the trauma of battle, they reflected on the leadership, bravery, and sacrifice that had defined their ship and its crew. The name USS Johnston became a rallying point for those who sought to honor the spirit of the men who had given everything in the face of insurmountable odds. The tale of the ship's action spread quickly among the ranks of the U.S. Navy and beyond, touching the hearts of all who learned of the extraordinary courage displayed by her captain and crew. Captain Ernest E, whose last moments were recounted with reverence by survivors, became a symbol of unyielding resolve. The Navy posthumously awarded him the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States, recognizing his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in battle. The citation noted his refusal to retreat, his fearless leadership, and his dedication to his crew. This recognition was a solemn acknowledgment of his ultimate sacrifice, one that served to inspire countless others. The surviving crew of Johnston were also honored for their bravery and resilience. Many received individual awards for their actions during the battle, from Silver Stars to Navy Crosses. Yet for the men themselves, the true reward lay in the legacy they carried forward, the knowledge that their sacrifice had played a critical role in the success of the mission and the survival of Taffy 3. Across the United States, news of Johnston's last stand captured the public imagination. Newspapers and radio broadcasts shared the harrowing details of the battle, painting vivid pictures of the desperate fight against overwhelming odds. Stories of heroism, like that of pharmacist mate John Davis's self-sacrifice or gunner's mate Samuel Peters's leadership in the water, resonated deeply with a nation already weary from years of war. These tales reinforce the idea that even in the darkest moments, ordinary individuals could achieve extraordinary feats. Within the Navy, the story of Johnston influenced the way commanders and strategists approached naval engagements. The lessons learned from the Battle off Samar, where smaller, less heavily armed ships managed to repel a far superior enemy force, highlighted the importance of tactical innovation, teamwork, and sheer determination. The actions of Johnston and her crew demonstrated that courage and ingenuity could offset material disadvantages, a lesson that would shape naval doctrine in the years to come. The story of Johnston also underscored the value of multinational cooperation. The support provided by Allied forces, from reconnaissance to logistical aid, played a vital role in the larger success of the Leyte Gulf campaign. This collaboration emphasized the interconnected nature of the war effort and the importance of unity among the Allied nations. In the years that followed, memorials and commemorations ensured that the legacy of Johnston and her crew would not be forgotten. Plaques, statues, and dedications bore witness to the ship's sacrifice, while annual ceremonies brought together survivors, their families, and the broader community to honor the fallen. Veterans of the battle often spoke at these events, their voices filled with both pride and sorrow as they recounted the bravery of their shipmates. The name Johnston became synonymous with selflessness, bravery, and the indomitable spirit of the United States Navy. For the men who had served aboard her, the ship was more than just steel and rivets. It was a living testament to their shared values and their unwavering commitment to one another. As decades passed, the story of USS Johnston remained a cornerstone of naval history, taught in academies and recounted in books and documentaries. Her legacy served as a reminder that heroism is not defined by the size of one's ship or the power of one's weapons, but by the courage to face the impossible and the determination to fight for what matters most. For those who had lived through the battle, the memory of Johnston was a deeply personal one. They remembered the camaraderie, the laughter, and the shared purpose that had bound them together. They also remembered the losses, the friends and comrades who had given their lives so that others might live. These memories, painful though they were, served as a source of strength and a call to honor those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. In the end, the story of USS Johnston is not just a tale of war. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It is a story of ordinary men rising to extraordinary challenges, of leadership that inspires, and of a legacy that endures. The last stand of the USS Johnston is more than a historical event. It is a beacon of hope and a reminder that even in the face of impossible odds, courage and conviction can make all the difference. The memory of the USS Johnston's last stand endures as one of the most extraordinary tales of courage in naval history. The ship's story is not merely about the violence and chaos of war. It is a testament to the resilience, bravery, and unyielding spirit of ordinary people who found themselves in extraordinary circumstances. Decades after the battle off Samar, Johnston became a symbol of what the human spirit could achieve. Her story is remembered not only by historians and naval enthusiasts, but by anyone who seeks to understand the essence of heroism. The ship's legacy remains woven into the fabric of the U.S. Navy and serves as a source of inspiration for sailors to this day. Johnston's ultimate fate, sinking beneath the waves, could have consigned her to obscurity. Yet her rediscovery decades later revived her legacy. In 2019, a deep-sea exploration team located the wreckage of USS Johnston at a depth of over 20,000 feet, the deepest known shipwreck ever found. The haunting images of her battered hull were a sobering reminder of the ferocity of the battle and the sacrifice of her crew. It was a moment of closure for the families of those who served aboard her and a chance to honor their bravery anew. The ship's rediscovery reinforced the magnitude of her story. Survivors, now elderly, recalled their experiences with pride, recounting Captain Evans' orders, the chaos of battle, and the camaraderie that carried them through. The recovery of Johnston's wreckage served as a tangible connection to the past, ensuring that future generations could continue to learn from her story. The ship's place in naval history is secured as one of the most iconic examples of selflessness and tactical brilliance. Captain Evans' famous last words, "A ship is no good without her crew," resonate as a declaration of the unbreakable bond between leader and crew. Evans' Medal of Honor citation remains a powerful reminder of his leadership, embodying the ideals of service and sacrifice that defined the U.S. Navy. Beyond the medals and monuments, Johnston's legacy is found in the lessons she imparted. The ship's actions demonstrated the value of initiative, the importance of innovation under pressure, and the power of collective determination. These lessons remain embedded in the training of naval officers and sailors worldwide. The significance of Johnston's stand also lies in its broader impact on the Pacific War. By holding off Kurita's fleet and protecting the vulnerable escort carriers, Johnston and her crew ensured the success of the Leyte Gulf campaign. Their sacrifice allowed the Allies to secure critical footholds in the Philippines, hastening the eventual defeat of the Japanese Empire. This contribution, made at such great cost, underscores the pivotal role played by smaller ships and their crews in the larger war effort. For those who study history, Johnston serves as a reminder of the human cost of war. Each name etched into memorials commemorates a life cut short, a family forever changed. Yet, amid the sorrow, there is a profound sense of pride, a recognition that these sacrifices were not in vain. They represent the highest ideals of service, courage, and unity. Johnston's legacy extends beyond the Navy, touching the hearts of all who hear her story. School children learn about her daring last stand. Filmmakers and writers draw inspiration from her crew's bravery. The ship's story transcends the boundaries of time and geography, speaking to universal themes of resilience and heroism. As the years pass, the tale of the USS Johnston will remain a beacon for all who face overwhelming odds. Her name is etched not only in the annals of naval history, but in the hearts of those who honor bravery and sacrifice. Her crew's actions remind us that even in the darkest moments, there is light to be found in the courage and determination of the human spirit. Today, the site of Johnston's wreckage is a solemn place, untouched and preserved as a graveyard for the brave souls who went down with her. This resting place, deep beneath the ocean's surface, is a testament to the ultimate sacrifice made by her crew, a silent witness to their extraordinary courage. The story of the USS Johnston does not end with her sinking. It lives on in every act of bravery inspired by her example. Her legacy is a call to remember, to honor, and to strive for the same courage and dedication that her crew displayed. The ship and her crew have become eternal symbols of what it means to fight for something greater than oneself, a legacy that will never be forgotten. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps this community growing and motivates me to bring you more incredible stories.